I never thought I'd be the kind of woman who could betray her family. I'd always considered myself dependable, a good wife, a good mother, someone who made the right choices, no matter how difficult life got. But life has a way of humbling you, of showing you just how little you truly know about yourself. This is the story of how I betrayed my husband, my family, and everything I believed in. It's a story about love, lust, and the dangerous blurring of boundaries. And it all began with something I never should have seen. My name is Claire. For most of my life, I've been the kind of woman people describe as dependable. I had a career I was proud of, a home I loved, and a marriage that, while not perfect, felt solid and enduring. My husband, Mark, was my rock. We'd been married for 20 years, and though the fiery spark of our early days had faded into a comfortable routine, I never doubted his love or loyalty. He remembered anniversaries, held my hand during movies, and always made me feel safe, or so I thought. Then there was Jake, the boy we adopted when he was 16. Jake wasn't our biological child. After years of struggling with infertility, Mark and I decided to adopt. Jake had spent most of his life moving between foster homes, scarred by instability and neglect. When he came to us, he was quiet and reserved, but over time, he grew into a confident and kind young man. I was proud of him, proud of the person he was becoming. But as the years went by, I started noticing something unsettling. Jake wasn't just attached to us, he was attached to me. He followed me around the house, like a shadow, hanging on my every word. He'd sit next to me on the couch, his leg brushing against mine, and I'd feel a strange flutter in my chest that I couldn't explain. At first, I told myself it was nothing. He was just a boy who'd never had a mother's love, and I was the closest thing he'd ever had to one. But deep down, I knew there was more to it. The way he looked at me sometimes, it wasn't the way a son should look at his mother. There was hunger in his eyes, a longing that twisted my stomach with guilt, and something else I didn't want to name. Mark noticed it too, though he never said anything. He'd give me sideways glances when Jake was around, his jaw tight with unspoken frustration. We both pretended everything was fine, even as the tension in our house grew thicker by the day. Then came the night that changed everything. It was a warm summer evening, and Mark was working late. Jake had gone to his room after dinner, and I was in the kitchen cleaning up. The house was quiet, the kind of quiet that feels heavy and oppressive. I finished the dishes, and decided to check on Jake before heading to bed. His door was slightly ajar, and I could hear faint music coming from inside. I knocked lightly, but there was no response, thinking he might be asleep. I pushed the door open a little further, and peeked inside. What I saw made my heart stop. Jake was sitting on his bed, his back to the door, completely unaware of my presence. His shirt was off, and his jeans were unbuttoned. His hand moved rhythmically beneath the waistband. My breath caught in my throat, and a surge of emotions hit me. Shock, embarrassment, and something else I couldn't quite name. I should have turned away, closed the door, and pretended I'd never seen anything, but I didn't. I just stood there, frozen, watching as Jake's movements became more urgent, more desperate. And then, as if sensing my presence, he turned around. Our eyes met. For a moment neither of us moved. Jake's face flushed with embarrassment, and he quickly pulled his hand away, fumbling to button his jeans. I felt a surge of guilt and shame, but there was something else too, a strange electric thrill, that made my stomach twist in knots. "Claire," he said, his voice trembling. "I didn't know you were there." I didn't know what to say. My mind was racing, my heart pounding in my chest. I should have apologized, told him to forget what had happened, but instead, I just stood there, staring at him, my body betraying me in ways I didn't want to admit. And then without thinking, I stepped into the room and closed the door behind me. The moment I closed the door, I knew there was no turning back. The air in Jake's room felt charged, electric, as if the walls themselves were holding their breath. Jake was still sitting on the bed, his face flushed, his eyes wide with a mixture of shock and something darker. "Claire," he said again, his voice barely above a whisper. "I'm sorry, I didn't mean for you to see that." I didn't respond at first. My mind was racing, my heart pounding so loudly, I was sure he could hear it. I should have turned around and walked out. I should have apologized and told him to forget what had happened, but instead, I took a step closer, my eyes locked on his. "It's okay," I said, my voice trembling, "you don't have to apologize." Jake's eyes widened, and for a moment, he looked like a scared child, vulnerable, unsure, and desperate for reassurance. But then something shifted in his expression, something dark and hungry. He stood up, closing the distance between us. "Claire," he said, his voice low and hesitant, "I don't know what's happening, but I can't stop thinking about you." His words sent a shiver down my spine, and I felt a surge of emotions, guilt, shame, and something else I didn't want to name. I knew this was wrong, knew it was a line I should never cross. But the way he was looking at me, the way his body was so close to mine, made it impossible to think clearly. "Jake," I said, my voice barely above a whisper, "we can't do this, it's wrong." He shook his head, his eyes filled with desperation and longing. "I know it's wrong, but I can't help how I feel. You're the only person who's ever really cared about me. Claire, you're the only one who's ever made me feel like I matter." His words cut through me like a knife, and I felt a surge of guilt and shame. I knew I should push him away, tell him this could never happen, but the truth was, I didn't want to. The truth was, I wanted him just as much as he wanted me. And then before I could stop myself, I reached out and touched his face, my fingers tracing the line of his jaw. Jake's breath hitched, and for a moment he just stood there, his eyes locked on mine, then slowly he leaned in and kissed me. It wasn't a chaste kiss, the kind a son might give his mother. It was hungry, desperate, full of all the longing and pain he'd been carrying inside him for so long. And God help me, I kissed him back. For a moment, I forgot that he was my son, forgot that I was married, forgot everything except the way his lips felt against mine. When he finally pulled away, we were both breathing hard, our faces flushed with shame and desire. I wanted to say something, to tell him this could never happen again, but the words caught in my throat. Instead I turned and fled to my room, locking the door behind me. I spent the rest of the night, lying in bed, staring at the ceiling, trying to convince myself that it had been a mistake, a moment of weakness, that I could put behind me. But deep down, I knew the truth, that kiss had awakened something in me, something dark and dangerous, that I couldn't ignore. And as much as I wanted to pretend it had never happened, I knew it was only the beginning. The days that followed that first kiss were a haze of guilt and confusion. I avoided Jake as much as I could, throwing myself into work and household chores to keep my mind occupied. But no matter how busy I was, I couldn't stop thinking about him. The memory of his lips on mine played on a loop in my mind, a constant reminder of what I'd done and what I still wanted to do. Jake, for his part, seemed just as conflicted. He kept his distance too, but I could feel his eyes on me whenever we were in the same room. There was a tension between us now, a charged energy that made the air feel heavy and oppressive. Mark noticed it, of course. He wasn't blind, but he didn't say anything, and I was too much of a coward to bring it up. Then one night, everything came to a head. Mark was out of town for a work conference, and I was home alone with Jake. We'd been tiptoeing around each other all day, neither of us willing to acknowledge the elephant in the room. By evening, the tension was unbearable. I decided to pour myself a glass of wine, hoping it would help me relax. I was sitting on the couch, staring blankly at the TV. When Jake walked into the room, he didn't say anything at first. He just stood there, watching me with those piercing blue eyes of his. Finally, he spoke, his voice low and hesitant. "Claire," he said, and the sound of my name on his lips sent a shiver down my spine. "We need to talk." I took a sip of my wine, trying to steady my nerves. "About what?" I asked, though I already knew the answer. He stepped closer, his hands shoved deep in his pockets. "You know what I did, I know you do, but I wasn't ready to face it." "Jake, this isn't a good idea," I said, my voice trembling. "What happened the other night, it was a mistake. We can't let it happen again." He shook his head, his expression pained. "It wasn't a mistake, you know it wasn't. I felt this way for a long time, Claire. I just didn't know how to tell you." I stared at him, my heart pounding in my chest. "Jake, you're my son, this is wrong. I'm not your son," he said, his voice rising. "I'm not your blood, you didn't raise me, we're not family, not really." His words hit me like a punch to the gut. I wanted to argue, to tell him he was wrong, but deep down, I knew he had a point. Jake wasn't my biological child. He was a teen we'd taken in, a boy who'd become a part of our lives, through circumstance, not blood. But that didn't make what we were doing any less wrong. "Jake, please," I said, my voice breaking, "we can't do this, it's not right." He stepped closer, his eyes burning with intensity. "I don't care if it's right or wrong, I love you, Claire, and I think you love me too." I opened my mouth to protest, but no words came out because the truth was, he was right. I did love him, not as a mother loves her son, but as a woman loves a man, and that realization terrified me. Before I could stop him, Jake closed the distance between us, and kissed me again. This time, I didn't pull away. I kissed him back, my hands tangling in his hair, as the wine glass slipped from my fingers, and shattered on the floor. In that moment, nothing else mattered, not my marriage, not my morals, not the life I'd worked so hard to build. All that mattered was Jake and the way he made me feel. We didn't stop at kissing, one thing led to another, and before I knew it, we were in my bedroom, our clothes scattered on the floor. It was wrong, so wrong, but I couldn't bring myself to care. For the first time in years, I felt alive, desired, wanted in a way Mark hadn't made me feel. In a long time, afterward, we lay in bed together, our bodies tangled in the sheets. Jake's head was resting on my chest, his fingers tracing lazy patterns on my skin. I should have felt guilty, ashamed, but all I felt was a strange sense of peace. "This doesn't change anything," I said, more to convince myself than him. "We can't let this happen again." Jake lifted his head to look at me, his eyes dark and serious. "It already has, Claire. And you know it's not going to stop." I wanted to argue, to tell him he was wrong, but I couldn't, because deep down, I knew he was right. This wasn't a one-time mistake, it was the beginning of something much bigger, something that would change all of our lives forever. The weeks that followed that night were a whirlwind of secrecy and guilt. Jake and I tiptoed around each other during the day, careful not to let Mark suspect anything. But at night, when the house was quiet and Mark was asleep, we gave in to our desires. It was wrong, I knew that, but I couldn't stop myself. Jake had become an addiction, a drug I couldn't quit no matter how hard I tried. Mark, of course, had no idea what was going on. He was oblivious to the tension in the house, too wrapped up in his work, to notice the way Jake and I looked at each other, when we thought no one was watching, but I could see the cracks starting to form in our marriage. Mark and I had always been close, but now there was a distance between us that I couldn't bridge. I told myself it was just a phase, that things would go back to normal once Jake was out of the house. But deep down, I knew that was a lie. Then one evening, everything changed. Mark came home early from work, his face pale and drawn. He'd been under a lot of stress lately, and it was starting to show. I was in the kitchen preparing dinner when he walked in and sat down at the table. "We need to talk," he said, his voice heavy with exhaustion. I froze, my heart pounding in my chest. Had he found out about Jake and me? Was this the moment everything came crashing down? "What's wrong?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. Mark sighed and ran a hand through his hair. "It's Jake. I think he's in trouble." I felt a surge of relief, followed immediately by guilt. "What do you mean?" "I got a call from his school today," Mark said. "They said he's been acting out, skipping classes, getting into fights. They're worried about him." I frowned, my mind racing. Jake had always been a good student, quiet and well-behaved. This was completely out of character for him. "Did they say why?" Mark shook his head. "No, but I think it has something to do with his past. You know how hard it's been for him, moving from one foster home to another. Maybe he's just struggling to adjust." I nodded, but I couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to it than that. Jake had been acting strange lately, but I'd assumed it was because of our affair. Could there be something else going on? That night, after Mark had gone to bed, I went to Jake's room. He was sitting on the bed, staring at the wall, his expression blank. I sat down beside him and put a hand on his shoulder. "Jake, what's going on?" I asked gently. "Your dad told me about the school. Why are you acting out?" He didn't answer at first, then slowly, he turned to look at me, his eyes filled with a mixture of anger and pain. "I can't do this anymore," he said, his voice trembling. "I can't keep pretending like everything's okay, when it's not." My heart sank. "What do you mean?" He stood up and began pacing the room, his hands clenched into fists. "I mean this, it's tearing me apart, Claire. I love you, but I can't keep living like this, sneaking around, lying to Mark. It's not fair to him, and it's not fair to me." I felt a lump form in my throat. "Jake, no," he interrupted, his voice rising. "You don't get to say anything. You're the one who started this. You're the one who kissed me that night, and now I can't stop thinking about you, about us, but it's wrong, Claire, it's so wrong." Tears filled my eyes as I realized the truth of his words. I had started this, I had crossed a line that should never have been crossed, and now Jake was paying the price. "I'm sorry," I whispered, my voice breaking. "I never meant to hurt you." Jake stopped pacing and looked at me, his expression softening. "I know you didn't, but that doesn't change the fact that you did. And now I don't know what to do." I reached out and took his hand, squeezing it tightly. "We'll figure it out, Jake, together, I promise." But even as I said the words, I knew they were empty. There was no easy way out of this mess, no way to undo the damage we'd done. And as much as I wanted to believe we could find a way to make things right, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were headed for disaster. The days that followed Jake's confession were a blur of pain and regret. Mark moved out of the house, unable to bear the sight of me, or Jake. He filed for divorce, and the proceedings were swift and brutal. He didn't fight me for the house or the money, he just wanted to be rid of me, and I couldn't blame him. The final decree came through on a cold gray morning, and I sat on the floor of our empty living room, staring at the papers in my hands, feeling like my life was over. Jake, meanwhile, was struggling to find his footing. He dropped out of school and took a job at a local grocery store, but it was clear he was just going through the motions. He barely spoke to me, and when he did, it was only to lash out, to blame me for everything that had gone wrong. "You ruined my life," he said one night, his voice trembling with anger. "I had a chance at a normal life, a family, and you took that away from me." I wanted to argue, to tell him that he played a part in this too, but I knew it wouldn't do any good. The truth was, I had ruined his life. I had taken a vulnerable young man, and twisted our relationship into something dark and destructive, and now we were both paying the price. One evening, as I was cleaning out the attic, I found a box of old photographs. They were pictures of Mark and me, from the early days of our marriage. We looked so young, so happy, so in love. I sat there on the floor, flipping through the photos, tears streaming down my face, as I remembered the life we'd once had. And then at the bottom of the box, I found a letter. It was from Mark, written shortly after we'd gotten married. In it he talked about how much he loved me, how excited he was to start our life together, how he couldn't wait to grow old with me. I read the words over and over, my heart breaking with each sentence. "Claire," he'd written, "you are my everything. I can't imagine my life without you. I promise to love you, to cherish you, to be faithful to you, for the rest of my life." I felt a surge of anger at the words, at the promises he'd made and broken, but more than that, I felt a deep aching sadness, for the life we'd lost, for the love we'd destroyed, for the people we'd once been. I didn't know what to do with the letter, with the memories, with the pain, so I put it all back in the box, and shoved it into the corner of the attic, where I wouldn't have to see it, but I knew it would always be there. A reminder of what I'd lost, of the choices I'd made, of the life I'd once had.